He's the man who danced on rooftops, made us laugh through our living rooms, and defined an entire era of family entertainment. For over 7 decades, Dick Van Dyke has been Hollywood's eternal optimist. With that crooked grin and unmistakable energy, he became a household name. But now, at 92 years old, the legendary entertainer is revealing something fans never expected: the darkest chapter of his life, hidden beneath the glitz and glamour. To the world, Van Dyke was the embodiment of lightheartedness. He starred in classics like Mary Poppins and The Dick Van Dyke Show, lighting up screens with effortless charm. Audiences saw a man who seemed to have it all: success, laughter, and a seemingly perfect life. But what they didn't see was the silent storm brewing behind those iconic smiles. For years, Van Dyke fought a personal battle far from the spotlight. Alcoholism and depression became his secret companions, lurking behind the scenes while he delivered flawless performances and accepted countless awards. The man who made millions believe in magic, who tap-danced through the streets of London on screen, was quietly unraveling when the cameras stopped rolling. Now, nearly a century into his life, Van Dyke is breaking the silence. In rare interviews and personal reflections, he admits there were times when he felt completely lost, drowning in addiction and emotional turmoil. His story is not just one of fame and fortune, it's one of survival. Today, we go beyond the laughter to reveal the truth about Dick Van Dyke's private struggles. A story of hidden pain, remarkable resilience, and the long road he walked to finally find peace. Dick Van Dyke was born on December 13, 1925, in West Plains, Missouri. But it wasn't long before his family moved to Danville, Illinois, a small town where Van Dyke's story truly began. Growing up during the Great Depression, life was simple, but it wasn't easy. His father, Loren, was a traveling salesman, often away from home, while his mother, Hazel, held the family together as a stenographer. Money was tight, but Van Dyke's spirit was anything but poor. As a child, he gravitated toward entertainment. He loved to sing, mimic voices, and make people laugh. His earliest audiences were family and neighbors, drawn to his natural charm and comedic timing. Yet, behind his lightheartedness, Van Dyke also carried the weight of a strict, religious upbringing that didn't always mesh with his growing curiosity about show business. He spent much of his childhood caught between two worlds: the world of small-town Midwestern values and the pull of the stage that seemed to whisper promises of something bigger. By the time World War II arrived, Van Dyke was ready to escape the boundaries of his hometown. He enlisted in the United States Army Air Forces, hoping to become a pilot, but was rejected for being underweight. Instead, he served as a radio announcer and later joined the Special Services, entertaining troops at military bases. It was during these performances that Van Dyke discovered his true calling: the ability to lift people's spirits, even in the darkest times. When the war ended, he didn't waste time. Van Dyke partnered with a friend to form a comedy duo, traveling the nightclub circuit and honing his craft. By the early 1950s, he landed his first television job as a host on a morning show in New Orleans. But the big break didn't come until 1960, when he was cast in the Broadway musical Bye Bye Birdie. His performance was electric, earning him a Tony Award and opening the door to television history. Soon after, Van Dyke became the face of The Dick Van Dyke Show, a series that not only made him a household name, but cemented his status as one of the most beloved comedic actors of his generation. In 1964, Dick Van Dyke took a step into cinematic history. Walt Disney himself handpicked him to play Bert, the cheerful chimney sweep with a mysterious sparkle in his eye. in what would become one of the most iconic films of all time, Mary Poppins. It wasn't just another role for Van Dyke. It was a chance to transport millions into a magical world of rooftops, chalk-drawn adventures, and heartwarming melodies. To the outside world, it seemed like a perfect fit. Van Dyke's infectious energy paired seamlessly with Julie Andrews' graceful charm. Together, they created movie magic that would define childhoods for decades. Songs like Step in Time and Chim Chim Cher-ee became instant classics, and Bert's joyous spirit became a part of Van Dyke's public identity. Audiences saw him as a man who could dance with animated penguins and make the impossible feel possible. But behind the scenes, it wasn't as picture-perfect as it appeared. Van Dyke has since admitted that while Mary Poppins was soaring at the box office, he was beginning to quietly spiral. "I felt like an imposter," he once said, reflecting on the pressure of performing opposite Julie Andrews and carrying the weight of Disney's expectations. That iconic Cockney accent, now both beloved and gently mocked, was the least of his worries. Off-camera, the cracks were starting to show. At the time, Van Dyke was already struggling with alcohol. The colorful streets of Edwardian London he danced through on set stood in stark contrast to the personal darkness creeping into his life. The long hours, the need to always be on, and the quiet loneliness that followed him home after the cameras stopped rolling began to weigh heavy. Still, Van Dyke gave audiences everything he had. The film's success was staggering, earning him global recognition and cementing his place in Hollywood royalty. Yet, beneath the applause and accolades, he was fighting a growing dependency on alcohol that no one saw coming. In many ways, Mary Poppins became symbolic of the duality in Van Dyke's life: joy and wonder on the surface, but shadows hiding just beneath. It was one of the brightest moments in his career, but it also marked the period when his private battles began to grow louder. For most of America, Dick Van Dyke was the man who could make anyone smile. But behind the curtain, far from the glowing television screens and packed movie theaters, he was drowning. Alcohol had quietly become his escape, a way to numb the exhaustion and expectations that fame placed on his shoulders. It didn't start as a full-blown addiction. At first, Van Dyke drank socially, like so many in the industry. A glass here, a nightcap there, something to take the edge off after long shoots and live performances. But slowly it became more than that. The lines between work and relief blurred. His glass was always full, and so was the quiet storm building inside him. The pressures of maintaining his happy-go-lucky image made it worse. To the public, he was the lovable klutz, the eternal optimist who made the world forget its troubles. But Van Dyke couldn't escape his own. The nights stretched longer. The drinks came faster. The man who once lifted up his fellow soldiers during World War II with laughter was now sinking into silence and shame. By the early 1970s, it was undeniable. Van Dyke was an alcoholic. The addiction started to impact his work and his personal life. His marriage to Margie Willett, the mother of his 4 children, was strained. Friends grew concerned, but Van Dyke kept them at bay, hiding behind his trademark smile and showbiz persona. Eventually, the facade began to crumble. He could no longer deny the physical and emotional toll it was taking. "I realized I had become dependent," Van Dyke later confessed. "I was hurting the people I loved the most." It wasn't just about the drinking anymore. It was about the man he was becoming. In 1972, Van Dyke made a decision that would change his life. He checked himself into a hospital for treatment. No press releases, no headlines, just a private man taking his first fragile steps toward reclaiming control. It was a humbling experience, but one that saved him. Recovery was not an overnight victory. There were setbacks, there were doubts. But for Van Dyke, acknowledging the problem was the key. He slowly rebuilt trust with his family, sought therapy, and leaned on the support of close friends who stood by him. His battle with addiction left scars, but it also gave him a new sense of purpose. Van Dyke never shied away from speaking about his struggles in later years. He openly shared his story to help others see that even the people who seem to have it all can be lost behind closed doors. In interviews, he has stressed that addiction doesn't discriminate, not even against the most cheerful man on TV. What makes Van Dyke's story so powerful is not the darkness itself, but the choice he made to step back into the light. His fight with alcoholism became one of the defining challenges of his life, and one of his greatest victories. While Dick Van Dyke was winning the hearts of millions on screen, his personal life was unraveling behind closed doors. His marriage to Margie Willett, which had started with a quiet ceremony on a radio show in 1948, was supposed to be his rock, the steady hand guiding him through the ups and downs of show business. But as his battle with alcoholism deepened, so did the cracks in their relationship. The two had built a family together, raising 4 children, while Van Dyke's career skyrocketed. But fame, long absences on set, and his growing addiction created distance. The man who played the lovable family man on The Dick Van Dyke Show was struggling to hold his real-life family together. Margie, loyal and supportive through the early years, found herself emotionally adrift, watching her husband slip further away with every drink. By the early 1980s, the marriage was strained to its limits. Van Dyke later admitted that the relationship had been faltering for years, but neither of them wanted to give up on what they had built. Yet, the emotional toll was too much. After 36 years of marriage, Van Dyke and Willett quietly separated in 1984, eventually divorcing in 1987. Not long after, Van Dyke found unexpected companionship in someone who had also faced her share of struggles. Michelle Triola Marvin, an actress and longtime partner of Lee Marvin, entered his life. The two formed a bond rooted in understanding and resilience. Michelle stood by him as he continued his recovery, offering Van Dyke the kind of support and partnership he had been missing. They were together for more than 30 years, sharing a quiet life away from the Hollywood spotlight. Their relationship endured until Michelle's death from cancer in 2009, a devastating loss for Van Dyke, who described her as the person who helped him find his footing again. Despite the personal heartaches and broken bonds, Van Dyke never lost his capacity to love. His relationships reflected the same duality seen throughout his life: the laughter and the sorrow, the joy and the pain. After years of personal struggle and heartbreak, most would expect a man like Dick Van Dyke to quietly fade into the background, leaving behind only reruns and memories. But Van Dyke wasn't finished, not by a long shot. Instead, he emerged from the shadows stronger, with a renewed sense of purpose that would inspire both his fans and those quietly fighting their own demons. The 1990s saw Van Dyke step back into the spotlight with a surprising burst of energy. He starred in Diagnosis: Murder, a crime drama where he played Dr. Mark Sloan, a physician who solved crimes alongside his son, played by his real-life son, Barry Van Dyke. The show ran for 8 seasons, proving that audiences still loved seeing Van Dyke's signature charm, even as he tackled a more mature and serious role. But Van Dyke's comeback wasn't just about television. Off-screen, he began openly sharing his battle with addiction and the toll it took on his life. What was once a secret became a story of resilience. He used his platform to speak candidly about recovery, mental health, and the importance of seeking help. breaking the silence in a Hollywood culture that often swept such struggles under the rug. He also became involved with various charitable efforts, advocating for causes ranging from addiction recovery programs to children's hospitals. In interviews and public appearances, Van Dyke never framed himself as a victim, but as a survivor, a man who had walked through darkness and found his way back into the light. His return wasn't just a second act, it was a statement. At an age when many retire quietly, Van Dyke redefined what it meant to rise again, proving that it's never too late to start over, to heal, and to help others along the way. Today, Dick Van Dyke stands as a living legend, not just for the roles that made him famous, but for the life he lived behind the scenes. At 92, he looks back on a journey marked by soaring triumphs and painful falls, yet always defined by resilience. His story is not just about the laughter he brought into millions of homes, but about the strength it took to smile through his own storms. In his later years, Van Dyke has embraced a new identity, not just as a beloved entertainer, but as a symbol of hope. He speaks with gratitude about the people who stood by him, the lessons learned from his darkest moments, and the gift of longevity. "I've been very blessed," he often says, never glossing over the rough edges of his past. He still dances, he still sings, he still brings joy to those around him. Whether he's posting light-hearted videos on social media or surprising fans at events, Van Dyke exudes the same childlike wonder that first captured hearts in the 1960s. Yet now, there's something deeper behind those familiar eyes. Wisdom hard-earned through years of quiet struggle. His legacy isn't just etched into Hollywood's Walk of Fame or preserved in the timeless reels of Mary Poppins and the Dick Van Dyke Show. It lives on in every person who has ever fought their own battle and found the courage to keep going. Because if Dick Van Dyke taught us anything, it's that even the brightest stars can weather the darkest skies and still come out smiling. Dick Van Dyke's story is more than just the journey of a Hollywood icon. It's the story of a man who danced through rooftops, made us laugh from our living rooms, and taught us that behind every smile, there could be a silent battle. At 92 years old, he has peeled back the curtain to show the world that even legends have their demons, but also the strength to overcome them. From the small town of Danville to the stages of Broadway, from Disney's magical London skies to hospital rooms where he confronted his darkest truths, Van Dyke has lived a life full of contradictions, joy and sorrow, laughter and loneliness, fame and fragility. Yet through it all, he has remained a beacon of perseverance. His message is simple but powerful. No matter how far you fall, no matter how heavy the burden, there is always a way forward. The story of Dick Van Dyke is not just one of stardom, but of survival, and a legacy that continues to inspire generations to believe in second chances and to never stop dancing.